I like to teach the world to sing. Sing with me. Perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company. And the real I like to teach.
Have you ever thought there's something timeless about the classic old-school Coca-Cola adverts? This is the famous Hilltop ad from 1971. It's still instantly recognisable today. But what you might not know is that the original recipe for Coke dates back to 1886, and it's barely changed at all since it was first invented. It's the same with crop rotation and the QWERTY keyboard. These are ideas or models that have endured over many decades, centuries in some cases. They haven't been fiddled around with or updated or modernised. They just simply work. And if you're wondering what all that has to do with press releases, well, I'm sure I don't have to spell it out for you. For more than 100 years, the PR community has used a near identical template for transferring information quickly and concisely to journalists. A blueprint for PR success. Today's press release templates are the same as they were back at the turn of the 20th century when they were first invented and PR people wore monocles and shot the breeze in gentlemen's clubs. Probably. And that's because the purpose of a press release hasn't really changed in all that time. I mean, yes, you can do more stuff with them now. You can make them look prettier. You can add video and images. You can link through to websites and social media. You can even use artificial intelligence to help write them for you. And more on that in a future episode. But the finished article will usually look the same. So I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs. If you want a press release template, you can find one easily enough on the internet. But what I am going to do is help you understand how to get the best out of that template, how to maximize the potential of every element within that template. Because some of the best ideas don't need evolution. They were pretty flawless to begin with. I'm Tom Clark, and this is The Perfect Press Release. This is episode 3, The Jigsaw. Like all good news stories, press releases are made up of several component parts. We've looked at this in earlier episodes. This is the who, when, where, what, why, how of your story. And rooted in these essential questions are a number of tangible things that you will be eager to get across to your reader. You need to think of them like jigsaw pieces of information that you'll need to include. They might be companies, people, places, products and services, new technology, science, history, success stories, testimonials, case studies, lessons learned, investments made, the list goes on. The challenge lies in bringing the jigsaw together in the most effective way. The good news is, just like Coca-Cola, there is a secret recipe to help you, and that is the press release template. And if you've just downloaded one of those off the internet, I can make a pretty good stab at what it looks like. It will have a headline right at the top. Under that, there's usually a sub-headline. Then there's a date line, that's usually the date and the city of origin. There's the first paragraph proper, which summarizes the most newsworthy elements of your story. Then there's the main body of the press release, which is several paragraphs which often contain a direct quote or several quotes from stakeholders in the story. And finally, at the bottom, there's contact information, including links and calls to action. Sometimes right at the end, you might have a boilerplate or an about section with company information in it. And that's it. Of course, you can play around with that a bit. You can add more quotes, move them around, add an image or two, embed a video. But broadly, this is the template that will help you complete your jigsaw and give your reader complete clarity on what you're trying to say. So, let's dig in. You don't need to look far to understand the importance of a good headline. Just look at your own habits as a consumer of news and information. Every email in your inbox, every news article on your website of choice, every tweet, Insta post, TikTok, the front cover of every book even. We spend our lives scrolling, either literally or metaphorically, skipping over thousands of stories every day on the strength of their subject lines, their titles, their headlines. So a great headline has to stop that thumb in midair, encourage that all-important tap. And in your press release, your headline is the single most important thing you'll write.
So starting at the top, I think the headline is obviously the most important part of your press release, because to be frank, it's likely to be all that most people read until they decide that, yes, this headline has sucked me in and I want to read the rest. So the headline has to tell the story on its own if possible. So you should have your company name or your organization name within the headline and as concise a statement about what it is you're announcing as possible. So don't try and tease people with a headline. You need to tell them, what this story is about.
That's Andrew Woodall. He's worked in press releases for many years, and his teams help companies refine their headlines to maximize their chances of pickup in the media. In terms of your Jigsaw pieces, the headline needs to carry your key message. Almost always it needs to answer the what and the who. As Andrew said there, headlines work much better when they include attribution to a clear source company or organisation. For some PR people, there's the temptation to disrupt this standard headline template, to change the narrative. But as journalist Lauren Potts says, being too oblique can either annoy or baffle your reader, and you can't afford that.
I think don't try to be too clever in your subject line. I saw a tweet asking about whether journalists like puns in the subject line, and I think this is personal taste, but they make me cringe. You see a lot at Easter, things like being explained or cracked. It's just super cliche, and I'd much rather you sent me something that helped me really think about what your story was going to be and see it as a headline in real life.
We're going to get to the other elements in the press release template in a moment, but headlines are so important, I think it's worth looking at some examples. And this is a good tip if you're looking for inspiration. Just have a look through a list of other press releases. So I'm scrolling now, having a look at some headlines from today on one of the main newswire services. It's pretty daunting. There are dozens and dozens of stories here, and I have to say, I'm not getting overexcited by many of them. It's like I'm scanning a wasteland for something interesting, but there's just dozens of stories here on research statistics and crypto tips and lots of dry product announcements. I have found one though, and here's the headline. MoneyGram celebrates Top Workplaces USA Award for third consecutive year. I think it's actually a pretty good example because if you dig into it, it employs the use of the next part of the press release Jigsaw too, and that is the subheadline. In this case, the subheadline reads, "This honour comes as MoneyGram continues to invest in its diverse global workforce of over 2,000 people across more than 30 countries." Well, hopefully you can see from that headline and the subheadline that using a subheader is good because it allows you to get more information across to your reader without cramming everything into the headline. You can think of it of the headline's loyal lieutenant, if you like. It's finishing the job of the headline without cramping its style. The subheader acts like an explainer, but there are some pretty unbreakable rules to adhere to too. It must only be one sentence, and it should always be written out fully, while the headline can be punchier, pithier, that kind of thing. What you'll also notice about the headline and the subheader is they're both written in the active voice. MoneyGram celebrates award win. Crucially, they need a verb. In this case, it's celebrates. Otherwise, it's just a statement, MoneyGram award win. As ever, the best way to familiarise yourself with how headlines and subheadlines work in tandem is to pick up a newspaper and see how news articles are written. And what you'll see is they are all written in the present tense and the active voice, unlike the rest of the press release or news article, which is written in the past tense. Next, we're on to the main body of the press release. Or are we? Because technically a press release should always have a date and a city of origin included before the story proper. And we call this the date line. If your press release is to be issued online or over a newswire service, this is actually a mandatory part of your press release. It makes it more official, more formal. It's also a tool designed to answer a journalist's where and when questions without wasting any time in the text itself. In the case of that MoneyGram example we looked at, the dateline reads simply Dallas, March the 20th. Okay. If the headline, subheadline, and dateline are like the holy trinity, that is, they're the visible bits at the top that might determine whether or not a reader scrolls past or reads on, the first paragraph is your synopsis. This is your killer paragraph. It's possibly the only one that a journalist will read, so it's your chance at an elevator pitch if we're being annoying and corporate. If you can't boil your story into 2 sentences, it's potentially too complicated.
First paragraph is the opportunity to get across the significance of the news as quickly as you possibly can. And then you're into what's recognised as the inverted pyramid of news, which is you start with the big information, the big story at the top in very simple terms, and the further you go down in the press release, the more detail you share, the more specific and the more pointed and more detail orientated you get.
PR professional Duncan McKean talked there about the inverted pyramid. And that's a very useful idea when you're sitting looking at all of those jigsaw pieces and wondering about the order. The inverted pyramid idea reflects the media sub-editing process in the newspaper industry. Basically, if a sub-editor is short of space, they'll simply start cutting your story from the bottom up to make it fit the page. And they do this quite brutally without regret. So if you've hidden a crucial nugget of information at the end or even in the middle of your story, it risks simply being lopped off. Remember that fairy tale comparison from the last episode? Never start with your once upon a time. Always start with the juicy stuff, right at the top. Broadly, your first paragraph should include the newsworthy element of your story, the context of why your story is important now, and a summary of who you are and what you stand for. So many companies I've worked with are trying to press release themselves. They're simply trying to get people to notice them. But if you think about it, that's really just advertising. A press release requires newsworthiness, topicality, currency. If the first paragraph just says, hey, here we are, we're great, then that's a weak press release already. There has to be news involved. And if it isn't obviously newsworthy, you need to make it newsworthy. For example, if you've been around for a while, let's say, you can tell your audience that you're launching today. You need to make it scream relevance or you won't get very far.
I think just at a very basic level, PRs should be asking themselves when they're sending out press releases, why does this story matter and why now? And you've got to ask yourself this very basic question. Why should the readers of the publication care? It's the same question that journalists ask themselves every time they think about a story and whether to do it. And there's just no reason that PRs can't use the same method. Because if you're not thinking about the audience of the publication, then what are you hoping to achieve by trying to get coverage in that publication?
Your headline, subheadline, dateline, and first paragraph should really provide a summary of your whole story. And as a guide, you should really only have used 50 to 80 words in telling that whole story, 100 words max. And in that time, you should have answered all of those crucial who, what, when, where, why, how questions that a journalist might ask. And only then do we move on to the rest of that inverted pyramid, the body of the press release, which contains the bulk of the detail. This is where you can try and motivate and influence your audience. You've got their attention, now you need to keep it. But you can also tell your story here. You can delve deeper into the background. On an appointment announcement, for example, the body is where you can go into that person's CV. On a product launch press release, you can go into some of the work that went into creating that product. And on that award win we looked at earlier, you can start to talk about some of the things you actually did to win that award in the body of the press release. And so the pyramid grows and the jigsaw starts to take shape. But this is no ordinary jigsaw. At the end, you should have some pieces left over, and that's okay. This is the lumber room for ideas that are interesting. They may be connected to the story in some way, but ultimately may be too tangential or irrelevant to your core message. And you should never, ever be afraid to leave those pieces out. Remember, we're trying to keep things reasonably tight here. 500, 600 words max. That's not a lot of time to get your message across. So some bits are inevitably going to hit the cutting room floor. Back to the press release rules now. Remember those from episode 1? While the headlines are always written in the present tense, giving the reader an idea of immediacy and importance, the body of your press release is always written in the past tense, or specifically, reported like it's just happened. Again, if you look at a newspaper, you'll get the idea. Another crucial detail, press releases should always be written in the third person. None of this, "We are delighted to announce," or "Our customers love us because ... And this is really important because it provides a level of objectivity, of corroboration even. It sounds like someone else is reporting it, and therefore it comes across less like an advert and more journalistic. But you can change the voice from time to time to keep things fresh, as Andrew explains.
Any press release should have a quote in, really. If you think about news articles in general, the media always have to approach companies for a quote. So if you've provided them with a quote in the first place, you've saved them a job and it's more likely to be used. The natural instinct is to start at the top and get a quote from the CEO of the company, because that's hearing it straight from the top of the organisation is what the media are going to want. But any sort of reputable representative of the company is good. If you're launching a new product, for instance, you may want the product director or someone that's going to represent the company well. But absolutely, a quote should be quite a prominent part of each press release.
So, quotes are a vital part of any press release. Adding a personal voice to the piece makes it more authentic and tangible. People trust people more than faceless organisations. Quotes also let you be subjective. They allow you the luxury of attributable opinion rather than objective fact. We're nearly there, I promise. The rest of the press release template is mainly housekeeping. Contact information. It's a bit pointless sending your news out into the ether with no way for your audience to respond. So you need to add a named contact, ideally, with their work number and email address. You need to add your website address too, because if that release is appearing online, it could be really useful in driving people to your website, drive traffic to you, help with your search engine optimization. Call to action links or buttons can also be good. Your readers got to the bottom of the press release, what should they do next? Click here for more information. Watch the video. Please come and talk to us. And you might also see notes to editors or an about section right at the bottom of a press release. If you've got space, these are like your end credits. They can include your once upon a time and give a bit of backstory to your reader. One more thing. Historically, press releases were just raw text sent down the wire to the media. But today's press release services allow us to incorporate visual assets like image and video. And in a world where content needs to stand out, that's really important.
Do send good images that are in focus and that provide both portrait and landscape options. Most of the time on digital outlets, for example, they much prefer a landscape, because if you have a portrait piece in there, it makes the scroll depth much longer, and it's going to take people longer to scroll through the piece, and they might not get to the end, which is not what you want. Also send a few options, not just one, and if you can, make them interesting. I know a lot of the time they're headshots, but you can be a bit clever with the camera angle. You can make sure your lighting is good. You can have them dressed in something that's eye-catching. There's plenty of ways to make what might be a dull picture interesting.
So there it is, the press release template. Not rocket science by any means, but it is essential to success. Get the template right, and your story will have the best chance of being taken seriously by the media. So what have we learned? The Jigsaw. The press release template helps to fit all the pieces of your story together in the most coherent and journalistic order. By the end, it should look like a news article in its own right. The headline, subheadline, and dateline set the tone, while the first paragraph summarises the main news elements of the press release. The reader should be able to stop reading there and then and still know all the essential points you're trying to get across. And finally, quotes will add personality and colour to your otherwise objective third-person voice. Okay, congratulations, you've written your press release. Next week, in the final episode of the series, we'll look at what to do next, where to send it, how to track its success, and how to learn from the experience to make the next one even better. The Perfect Press Release is written and produced by me, Tom Clark. Editing is by Jay Vidalingham at Clement Stories. If you'd like any help with writing your next press release, or if you want to book a free press release consultation, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website. The details are in the show notes. And on a completely different note, I'm also working on a new true crime podcast because, well, who isn't these days? I'm on the lookout for interesting, offbeat, historical crime stories. The more intriguing, the better. Maybe you have an unsolved mystery in your local village, or a nefarious great uncle who was always in trouble with the law. If you have any ideas, please get in touch. Thanks for listening.